In the deep, humid heart of the Florida Everglades, there is a boundary where the water meets the sawgrass, a place that has remained virtually untouched for thousands of years. But not too long ago, a massive engineering project decided to challenge that boundary. They wanted to drain a specific isolated section of the wetlands to make way for new developments and infrastructure. It seemed like a standard procedure, something that had been done 100 times before in the history of Florida's expansion. But as the massive pumps began to churn and the water levels started to drop, the landscape began to reveal secrets that had been submerged since the prehistoric era. What the biologists found hiding beneath the muck wasn't just a biological curiosity, it was something that sent a shiver through the entire scientific community. As the mud dried and the hidden floor of the swamp was exposed, they realized they hadn't just drained a wetland. They had opened a door to something that was never supposed to see the light of day. To understand why this discovery was so unsettling, you first have to understand the sheer complexity of the Florida wetlands. This isn't just a big puddle. It's a slow-moving river of grass, a delicate balance of minerals, gases, and ancient biological matter. For centuries, this water had acted as a pressurized seal, keeping the anaerobic environment of the peat soil perfectly preserved. When the engineers installed the drainage system, they were essentially removing the lid from a biological time capsule. As the water retreated, the first thing the biologists noticed was the smell. It wasn't the typical scent of a swamp. It was something far older, a chemical signature that didn't match the modern ecosystem. That was the first red flag. Something was down there that didn't belong in our modern world. The team of biologists, led by researchers who had spent their entire lives studying the Everglades, waded into the newly exposed basin. At first, they found the usual things you'd expect from a receding waterline: old cypress logs, discarded shells, and the skeletons of long-gone fish. But as they moved deeper into the center of the drain zone, the terrain changed. The ground wasn't just mud. It was a strange, gelatinous substance that seemed to pulse with a faint rhythmic energy. They reached a section of the basin that appeared to have been a deep underwater sinkhole. As the last of the water vanished into the drainage pipes, they saw it. At the bottom of the sinkhole lay a massive, interconnected network of calcified structures that looked less like natural rock and more like an organized, biological colony. These structures were huge, stretching across the floor of the basin like the ribs of some forgotten giant. But as the scientists got closer, they realized these weren't bones. They were nests, thousands of them, and they weren't empty. Nestled within the calcified ridges were giant, translucent spheres that looked almost like eggs. But they were the size of beach balls. They were perfectly preserved, held in a state of suspended animation by the unique pressure and chemical composition of the deep wetland water. As the air hit these spheres for the first time, in perhaps thousands of years, the translucent membranes began to clear, revealing the shapes inside. The biologists stood in absolute silence, their flashlights trembling as they looked at creatures that defied every known classification of Florida wildlife. What they were looking at were essentially ghost predators. Huge, serpentine organisms with features that looked like a terrifying mix of a prehistoric eel and something much more aggressive. These weren't fossils. Because of the incredible preservative qualities of the deep peat and the lack of oxygen, the biological matter was still intact. It was as if the draining of the swamp had interrupted a nap that was meant to last forever. One of the lead biologists reached out to touch the surface of one of the spheres, and the reaction was instantaneous. The creature inside shifted. It wasn't just preserved, it was potentially viable. The terrifying part wasn't just the appearance of these things. It was the realization that by draining the water, the humans had provided the exact environmental trigger, oxygenation, that could potentially wake them up. The panic among the research team was palpable. If these creatures were indeed a lost species of apex predator from an era when Florida was a very different place, their reemergence could rewrite the entire ecological balance of North America. They immediately called for a halt to the drainage project, but the water was already gone. The surrounding environment was changing rapidly. With the weight of the water removed, the ground began to shift and crack, opening up even deeper fissures in the basin floor. From these cracks, a thick bioluminescent vapor began to rise. This wasn't some move-style special effect. It was a concentrated release of ancient gases and spores that had been trapped alongside the creatures. The biologists realized that the wetland hadn't just been a home for these things. It had been their prison. The specific mineral content of the Everglades water had been keeping their metabolic processes at a near standstill. Now, in the heat of the Florida sun and the richness of the modern atmosphere, the process of awakening was accelerating. They began to hear sounds, low-frequency hums that vibrated in the chests of the researchers. It was a communication method that hadn't been heard on Earth for a very long time. The biologists were no longer looking at a nature project. They were looking at a potential biological event that they had no way of controlling. By the second night after the drainage was complete, the site had been completely cordoned off. The scientists were wearing full-body protective gear, not to protect the creatures, but to protect themselves from the unknown pathogens and spores being released from the muck. They set up high-resolution thermal cameras around the sinkhole, and what they saw on the monitors was chilling. The ghost predators weren't just individuals. They were part of a hive-like structure. The thermal signatures showed a massive heat bloom originating from deep beneath the basin, suggesting that the 500 or so visible nests were just the tip of the iceberg. There was an entire colony of these things, dormant and waiting, stretching miles beneath the Florida crust. The question then became, what do these things eat? If they were to fully wake up and emerge into the modern Everglades, the impact would be catastrophic. The current apex predators, like the American alligator and the invasive Burmese python, would be like snacks to these ancient giants. These creatures were designed for a much harsher. The biologists were essentially looking at a biological reset button for the Florida ecosystem. In a desperate bid to understand what they were dealing with, the team took a small sample of the biological material back to a mobile lab. The results were even more shocking. The DNA of these organisms didn't just predate modern animals. It contained sequences that suggested they were capable of extreme environmental adaptation. They had the ability to go into a dormant state for centuries, waiting for the right conditions to return. The draining of the wetland had accidentally created those right conditions. The humans had played right into the hands of an ancient survival strategy. As the third day dawned, the first of the spheres finally cracked. The sound was like a gunshot echoing across the dry basin. The biologists watched from a safe distance as a long, shimmering limb emerged from the translucent casing. It wasn't covered in scales or fur. It was a rhythmic, muscular structure that seemed to change color as it interacted with the light. The creature that stepped, or rather slithered, out of the nest was nearly 20 feet long, with a grace that was both beautiful and deeply unsettling. It didn't look around with eyes. It used a series of sensory pits along its head to map the environment through heat and vibration. It was the ultimate hunter, and it had just woken up in a world full of unsuspecting prey. The response from the government was swift and shrouded in secrecy. They realized that if word got out that an ancient, unknown predator had been unleashed by a public works project, the panic would be uncontrollable. But the biologists argued against any aggressive action. They realized that these creatures were a part of Earth's lost history, a missing link in the story of how life survived the great transitions of the planet. They proposed a daring plan. Instead of trying to eliminate the threat, they would reflood the basin. They would reverse the pumps, break the dams, and bring the water back as fast as possible. They hoped that by restoring the pressure and the mineral balance, they could force the creatures back into their dormant state. It was a race against time. The first creature was already moving toward the edge of the basin. Its sensory pits locked onto the heat signatures of the nearby deer and smaller mammals that lived in the surrounding sawgrass. The engineers worked frantically to recalibrate the massive pumps that had just finished draining the area. Every minute the creature was exposed to the air, its strength seemed to grow, absorbing the oxygen and the heat to fuel its ancient muscles. The moment the first surge of water began to pour back into the basin was one of the highest tension. The creature at the edge of the pit stopped. It turned its head toward the rushing water, emitting a sound that was half hiss and half growl. The water hit the cracks and fissures, sending up plumes of steam. The other eggs, still in the process of hatching, were submerged once again. The biologists watched on their monitors as the thermal signatures of the hatching creatures began to fade. The cold, mineral-rich water was working. It was putting the lid back on the pressure cooker. The 20-foot-tall pioneer wasn't going down without a struggle, though. It thrashed in the rising water, its massive body creating waves that threatened to overflow the temporary levees. But as the water level reached the height of its sensory pits, the creature's movements began to slow. The chemical signal of the Everglades was a command its biology couldn't ignore. It wasn't dying. It was being pushed back into its long sleep. Slowly, the creature sank back into the muck of the sinkhole, its shimmering body disappearing beneath the murky surface. The biologists stayed on site, monitoring the water chemistry with an intensity they had never used before. They added specific minerals to the water to ensure the seal was as strong as possible. The site was permanently designated as a restricted zone, hidden under the guise of an environmental preservation area. The drainage project was officially abandoned, with the public story being that the soil was too unstable for construction. Only a handful of people knew the real reason, that beneath that specific patch of Florida grass, an ancient colony of monsters was waiting for the water to disappear again. This event changed the way Florida approaches its wetland management forever. It served as a terrifying reminder that we don't always know what's beneath our feet. The Earth is old, and it has a long memory. Many of the nature projects we undertake are built on the assumption that the land is a blank slate, something we can mold to our needs. But as the biologists discovered in that drained basin, the land is more like a graveyard full of restless spirits. Sometimes the most successful nature project is the one where we decide to leave things exactly as they are. The discovery also opened up a new field of deep biology. Scientists began to wonder if there are other dormant colonies hidden in the deep swamps of the world, in the Amazon, in the Congo, or in the vast peat bogs of Siberia. If a simple drainage project in Florida could nearly unleash an ancient apex predator, what else is waiting for the right environmental shift to wake up? The ghost predators of the Everglades are still there, resting under several feet of water and muck. A silent threat that remains one of the most closely guarded secrets in biological history. As listeners, we often think of the natural world as something we have conquered. We map it, we categorize it, and we control it. But every now and then, nature pulls back the curtain and reminds us that we are just temporary residents on a planet that has been home to things far more powerful and mysterious than we can imagine. The terrifying thing isn't just the creatures themselves. It's the realization of how easily we can stumble into a catastrophe by underestimating the complexity of the world around us. The Everglades are now protected more fiercely than ever, not just for the birds and the gators, but to keep the water over that specific sinkhole. Biologists continue to monitor the sensors buried deep in the mud, listening for that low-frequency hum. So far, the ghosts are still sleeping, but they are a reminder that the balance of our world is incredibly fragile. One pump, one drain, one decision to improve on nature can lead to a discovery that we aren't prepared to handle. What's even more fascinating is the way the surrounding wildlife reacted after the water returned. For months, the local alligators refused to enter that specific basin. It was as if the ancient memory of a superior predator was imprinted in their very DNA. They knew, even if we didn't, that the apex of the food chain had briefly returned. The birds wouldn't nest in the nearby cypress trees, and the fish populations took a long time to return to the area. The entire ecosystem had been given a shock, a biological warning that resonated through every living thing in the vicinity. The biologists involved in the project have mostly moved on to other secrets, but they carry the weight of that discovery with them. They look at the wetlands not as a resource but as a guardian. The water isn't just life for the plants. It's a protective layer for us. It keeps the past where it belongs. The next time you see a massive engineering project moving through a natural space, remember the sinkhole in Florida. Remember the translucent spheres and the shimmering, 20-foot shadows. Some things are meant to stay submerged. The terrifying discovery in the Florida wetlands wasn't just about the creatures themselves, but about the sheer scale of the unknown. We spend billions of years looking at the stars, searching for alien life, but we often forget that there are aliens right here, buried under our own feet, relics of an Earth that was far more alien than anything we've seen on another planet. These organisms represent a time when the atmosphere, the gravity, and the competition for survival were all dialed up to an extreme level. To see them in the modern world is like seeing a glitch in the simulation of our current reality. As the years pass, the sediment in the basin continues to settle, burying the nests deeper once again. The vegetation has grown back thick and green, hiding the site from anyone who might wander too close. But the sensors are still there, blinking quietly in the dark, keeping watch over the deep. The ghosts are silent for now, their ancient metabolism slowed by the weight of the water we almost took away. It's a peace that was bought at a high price of panic and technical ingenuity, and it's a peace that we must maintain at all costs. Florida's history is full of stories of people trying to tame the swamp. But this is the ultimate story of the swamp taming the people. It taught the scientists that the water isn't just part of the environment. It's an active participant in the stability of our world. Without it, the ghosts of the past become the nightmares of the present. The project serves as a permanent case study in why large-scale nature projects need to be approached with a level of caution that borders on reverence. We are not just moving dirt, we are shifting the balance of ages. If you ever find yourself out on an airboat, gliding over the glass-like surface of the Everglades, take a second to look down into the dark water. You'll see the swaying grass, the occasional fish, and the reflection of the sky. But remember that there are levels beneath those, places where the water is older and the pressure is higher. Somewhere deep down, the ghost predators are still there, their shimmering forms tucked away in their calcified cradles. They are a part of Florida, a part of Earth, and a part of the long, mysterious story of life that continues to thrive in the shadows of our modern world. This event also triggered a rethink of the restoration efforts across the entire state. Instead of just trying to fix the current problems like phosphorus runoff or invasive species, biologists are now looking at paleo-restoration. They are trying to understand what the land looked like thousands of years ago, to ensure they don't accidentally disturb more of these ancient dormant zones. It's a new way of interacting with the Earth, one that acknowledges that the past is never truly gone. It's just waiting for a change in the environment to make its comeback. The incident was never officially publicized in the mainstream media, but within the close-knit community of wetland biologists, it is spoken of in hushed tones. It's known as the sinkhole event, a cautionary tale for any researcher who thinks they have the swamp figured out. It's a reminder that nature has its own way of protecting its secrets. And if we try to force those secrets into the light, we might not like what we find. The Florida wetlands are beautiful, vibrant, and essential. But they are also a vault, and as long as the water stays high and the air stays out, the vault remains closed. As the sun sets over the Everglades, the river of grass looks peaceful. The water ripples as a manatee surfaces for air or an alligator drifts lazily past. It's a scene of perfect modern tranquility. In the deep silence of the peat, the ancient heart of Florida continues to beat in slow motion. The ghost predators are there, a terrifying and magnificent testament to the endurance of life. And as long as we respect the boundaries of their world, they will remain exactly where they belong, in the deep, dark memory of the Earth. Ultimately, the Florida project wasn't a failure, even though it was abandoned. It was a success in a way that no one expected. It gave us a glimpse into a lost world, and taught us the most important lesson any biologist can learn, that the most powerful thing we can do for an ecosystem is often nothing at all. By stepping back and letting the water return, we saved the Everglades. And we might have saved ourselves from a localized biological extinction event that we weren't equipped to handle. The terrible thing they found was a warning. And luckily, the scientists were smart enough to listen. Now when we talk about large-scale nature projects, we refer to the Florida precedent. It means always checking the hidden layers of an environment before making a major change. It means understanding that the land has a history that stretches back far beyond our maps and our records. It means treating every wetland, every forest, and every desert as a potential sanctuary for something we might not yet understand. The ghost predators of the Everglades aren't just monsters in a sinkhole. They are the ultimate teachers of ecological humility. So the next time you hear about a plan to drain a wetland or clear a forest for development, think about what might be waiting just beneath the surface. Think about the millions of years of life that have come before us, and the ways they might have found to stick around. The Earth is full of surprises, and not all of them are friendly, but all of them are part of the incredible, terrifying, and beautiful story of our planet. And in the end, it's our job to make sure that story continues, without accidentally skipping to a chapter we aren't ready to read. The story of the drained Florida wetland remains one of the most intriguing mysteries in the scientific world. It challenges our understanding of biology, geology, and environmental management. It reminds us that we are part of a much larger, much older system. The water is back, the basin is full, and the creatures are dormant. But the memory of that shimmering, 20-foot shadow remains. A reminder that the world is much deeper and much more alive than we ever dared to imagine. As long as the Everglades remain, the secret of the sinkhole will be preserved, a silent guardian of a past that is better left undisturbed. In the final analysis, our relationship with nature is a dialogue. Sometimes we speak, and sometimes we listen. Nature spoke very clearly. It told us that there are places that belong to the past, and that our progress shouldn't come at the cost of the ancient balance. The biologists who stood in that dry basin, looking into the eyes of a creature from another time, understood that better than anyone. They chose to be the voices for the water, for the mud, and for the silence. The Florida sun continues to set over a landscape that is as mysterious as it is beautiful. The Everglades are a treasure, but they are also a mystery. They hold the water that half of Florida drinks. They support thousands of species, and they regulate the climate of the region. But they also hold the ghosts of a prehistoric world. And as we move forward into an uncertain future, that mystery is something we should cherish. It keeps us grounded. It keeps us curious. And most importantly, it keeps us humble. The ghost predators are still down there. And perhaps one day, in a few more million years, it will be their time to rule the sunlit world again. But for now, they sleep in the dark, and that is exactly where they should be. The experience of the scientists on that Florida project is a powerful narrative of discovery and restraint. It's a story about the moment when curiosity meets responsibility. As the water was pumped back into that basin, it wasn't just a physical act. It was an act of respect for the unknown. It was an acknowledgement that we are not the masters of every story. Some stories belong to the deep, sawgrass-scented air of the Florida swamp. That story continues to be written in the slow, rhythmic pulses of the earth itself, safely hidden beneath the protective cover of the water. This event serves as a milestone in the history of nature projects. It shows that the true value of a wetland isn't just in its current biodiversity, but in its role as a stable environmental container for the ages. The terrifying discovery was a gift, a glimpse into the incredible resilience of life. It taught us that even when things look empty or unused, they are often serving a vital purpose that we haven't yet discovered. The ghost predators of Florida are the ultimate symbols of that hidden purpose. They remind us to look closer, to move slower, and to always respect the power of the water. What we must remember is that the planet is not just a collection of resources for us to use. It is a living, breathing entity, with its own history and its own defenses. The terrifying secret found in the Florida sinkhole was just one of many such defenses. It was a fail-safe, a biological trap that we accidentally tripped. And while we were able to reset it this time, it serves as a warning for all future endeavors. We must be the stewards of the earth, not just its exploiters. We must learn to coexist with the ghosts of the past, ensuring that they remain exactly what they are, legends in the deep water. The Florida Everglades remain one of the most magical places on Earth. They are a place where you can feel the pulse of the planet in every dragonfly and every ripple. And now, for at least a few, they are a place where you know the ancient world is still very much alive. The secret is safe, the water is high, and the wind still whispers through the sawgrass. It's a piece that was nearly lost, but now it's more precious than ever. The story of the 500 eagles in Wyoming showed us how we can bring life back. The story of the Florida sinkhole shows us how we must sometimes stay our hand to keep the balance of the world intact. Both are essential lessons for the future of our relationship with the wild. As the airboats zip across the surface today, and the tourists marvel at the beauty of the swamp, the ghost predators remain in their deep, watery slumber. They are the silent partners in our ecosystem, a terrifying and beautiful secret that ensures we never get too arrogant. The earth is alive. It is old and it is full of surprises. And that, more than anything else, is what makes it so incredible. The Florida project may have ended with a resealed sinkhole, but it opened our eyes to a dimension of our world that we will never forget. The ghosts are still there, the water is still deep, and the story of life goes on, in all its mysterious, terrifying, and magnificent glory.